I'm Joanne Law, Director of Studies for Mediation Institute and co-founder of Interact Support. I'm on a mission to prevent violence by training and supporting dispute resolution practitioners. Mediation Musings is a series of conversations with mediators and for mediators. So if you're interested in dispute resolution, follow the channel. We're intending to update new recordings each week. Enjoy. Thank you very much, Matthew. Today I'm talking with Matthew Shepherd. He's a family lawyer with 30 years experience who in recent years has transitioned his practice much more towards mediation, family dispute resolution, collaborative law and arbitration. So towards the, I guess, the more facilitative or away from the absolutely adversarial end of the sector. So thank you very much, Matthew.
No, you're welcome, Joanne. It's nice to talk with you.
I was really interested in perhaps understanding a little bit more about what's motivated that transition that you've made in the way you practice family law.
I suppose there's a couple of reasons. I remember some decades ago having a moment when I was at a court conciliation conference and pulling my hair out, thinking to myself, boy, these people can't engage in conflict very well. And then I thought, well, that's pretty obvious. That's why they're in court. It sort of got me interested in working out why do clients, I suppose all of us, struggle to engage in disputes, conflict, or what you might just call joint decision making so badly. And that sort of set me off on, dare I say, a journey, to use that dreaded metaphor, of researching that stuff, doing a master's in dispute resolution from UDS in Sydney, becoming a mediator, becoming an FDRP, doing collaborative practice training in matters, and then arbitration. And what I found interesting as I embarked on all that is conflict and dispute isn't just the formless chaos black hole. Dispute until clients think that it is. There's actually a shape and a structure to how disputes actually work. And I've always found it interesting to reflect upon the research and the literature upon the shape and the form of dispute, because it can help clients better. And to be honest, it can also help a practitioner engage less reactively, more thoughtfully, perhaps less stressfully as well. So that's one part of it. It's also the classic middle-aged lawyers, middle-age crisis to embark upon mediation. And of course, many of us do the training. And of course, you then face the really hard task once you get your ticket to actually, well, there's two hard tasks, it seems to me. One is becoming really good at it. Yeah. And you're going to become really good at it by doing it. And then the catch-22 is getting the work in. Because as you would know, many of your listeners would know, plenty of people do mediation training. To turn that into a viable long-term mediation practice is another challenge in itself. So I suppose I also started transitioning my practice to the usual reasons lawyers do that, because you get sick of having to take sides. Great being a mediator, not having to advocate for someone, not having to take sides, and on one level, not having to take responsibility in the facilitative model, not having to take responsibility for them to reach a decision. And it's easy to say that, but even when you keep saying, well, I'm control of the process, they control the outcome, there's always a little bit of frustration and disappointment if they don't reach a group. But I think we're going to let that go. And it's certainly easier if you haven't got a 2 or 3 year relationship with them as you do as a family lawyer going through court. That's right. I can think of matters when I was acting for clients 30 years ago, and I can still remember micro details. What's great about mediation is it all evaporates. Within a couple of weeks, you can't remember a thing about it, which is also very healthy, I think. It's
much healthier for us as practitioners. And you know, sometimes in family law court, you might get to a certain point when you're advocating and you think, oh, gee, have I got the right client here?
Yes, no, of course you think that. There's probably no such thing as the right client. Mind you, even before I started transitioning in my practice, like most family lawyers, most time matters you would settle outside of a court process,
Yes.
or you'd certainly settle before a final hearing. But it can still be a fairly torturous pathway to get there, because if as lawyers tend to do, you're framing it all in terms of court outcomes, or you're negotiating or dispute resolving in the shadow of the court, that becomes a fairly exhausting process, and you don't necessarily end up with the best outcomes.
No.
And so there's another part of my interest in what used to be called alternative dispute resolution, but it's really primary dispute resolution, that is, other than going to court, is that the process you use has a big impact upon the quality of the agreements reached.
Yes.
And the process you use also has a big impact upon how readily those agreements are implemented.
Oh, look, absolutely. And actually, before we go on, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned some of the models that you use to help perhaps clients and certainly for yourself to understand the conflict. Are they things like the conflict spiral and those sort of things, or is there a particular model that you find?
Oh no, there's various different tools that I use. There's more circular conflict, or pizza of conflict, as he calls it. So I always found that very useful. I find it useful to think in terms of negotiating styles in reference to concern for self versus concern for others.
Oh yeah, I use that.
That's one where you've got the axis, the vertical axis is concern for self, and the horizontal axis is concern for others. And then you can plot different styles of negotiating: competitive, accommodating, avoidant, cooperative, or collaborative. That's useful. I also find some of these things is quite useful to show to clients.
Yes.
To get them reflecting upon, well, what's my default style? Do I wish to engage that in this particular negotiation or dispute? But it's also useful to think through what's the other person's style likely to be. And again, through the choice of the process you use, you can actually move people around those types of different negotiating styles. So I find all that stuff endlessly interesting. So there's a whole bunch of stuff like that, which once you sort of get into literature, it's endlessly fascinating, I find.
Yeah, oh, look, absolutely, I agree. And I agree that the benefit of using it with clients, particularly if, as you're going through, you identify, oh, this client's actually quite avoidant, or they're very competitive, and you might need to do some work with them to, help them to understand the benefits for them and for the other party to actually engage.
And often people don't think about what they're doing. They just do it. And they don't realise they've got choices.
No.
And once you've got choices, then you can start thinking about what's most appropriate in this particular situation. But I think, again, clients, and on one level, they're letting us into their lives at some of the worst, well, at least in the family law practice I have, they're letting us into their lives at some of their worst times. In a sense, we're privileged that they do that with us. And you can understand why they see what they're caught up in. It seems to be a totally unstructured mess. And to give them some tools and structures, it can help them find their way through it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, no, I agree. Now, you, I think you're doing a fair bit of lawyer-inclusive mediation or lawyer-assisted, so you've got...
In my practice, most of my work is referred by lawyers. Not all, but most of it is. And of that work, rightly or wrongly, a practice, certainly in Sydney anyway, it is that lawyers attend on most occasions. So not all of my mediations are lawyer-assisted in the sense of lawyers coming along, but a good majority is, yes.
Yeah. And are you doing some of the court-referred mediations as well?
Well, in Sydney, there's what's called the Family Law Settlement Service, where the court makes referrals to mediation. And to avoid that dance around or negotiation or indeed mediation about what mediator to use, they can use the Law Society as sort of the umpire to appoint a mediator. Since that scheme was set up in Sydney, and as far as I understand, it doesn't operate in all registries, 4 or 5 years ago, what's been interesting is, and I've got no evidence to back this up, it's purely anecdotal, is that there's been an increase in mediation work in Sydney. That is going to mediation. And in fact, the Family Law Settlement Service is not referring more matters. I think what's happening now is parties, the assistance of their lawyers, are actually just engaging in mediation more. So there has been a shift in Sydney. A cynic might say that's just because the family court system is so dysfunctional that you just want to stay if you possibly avoid it. Other people might like to think that there's been a little bit of a cultural shift, at least perhaps over the last 4 or 5 years, where mediation seems to be more the norm rather than the exception.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see whether that spreads out, because as far as I'm aware, it's not happening down here in Melbourne, or certainly not to the level that Sydney's happening with I think Judge Harmon driving it, or something.
Certainly, but there's other people not far behind him.
Yeah.
And again, it's been so dysfunctional in Sydney, the court system, that there's just too many customers for the board to deal with. So the more they get rid of, it serves their needs, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. So, and how does the arbitration work that you're doing fit into that, or is it totally separate?
I suppose it's part of a dispute resolution service that I offer. My personal view is that a facilitative mediation process is preferable. So parties can actually model their own outcomes with their particular situations. They can own it. If they own it, theoretically, there's going to be a greater propensity for them to actually facilitate it. And this might be me being a bit paternalistic, I suppose, but people take responsibilities for making those decisions. And it's difficult because it's joint decisions, a joint decision with a person whom, by definition, there's a problem in your relationship. So it's quite a big challenge.
Yeah.
However, some people try mediation, they don't reach agreements, or they don't reach full agreements. It always worries me then that all that hard work they've put in, all those partial agreements they've reached, they can just evaporate, which is a great pity, and they sort of go back to some other process or the back of the court queue. So it seems to me that arbitration, being a process by which the parties, and it has to be a purely voluntary process, but a voluntary process, parties enter into a arbitration agreement, they choose the arbitrator. If you set it up correctly, then that arbitrator is given the same powers as a judge to impose a binding decision. Can be appropriate in some circumstances, which is where, for whatever reason, mediation has failed entirely, or where it's just not suitable, which opens up a whole other question of when a party is suitable for mediation or not. But maybe we don't get involved in that important discussion right now, or maybe where there's been partial agreements reached. So that instead of those partial agreements and all the hard work evaporating, parties can agree, well, let's just put part of the decision to the arbitrator. So in the family law property context, for example, who gets the house? Are we going to split super? Or is someone to keep all the super and the other person gets more money from somewhere else? And those sort of structural things, part of the agreement could be put to an arbitrator. Or if it just comes down to the percentages and the shape or the package of the settlement can be agreed, then that can be put to an arbitrator and resolved fairly quickly and therefore more efficiently in getting to the back of the court queue. So there's a few situations where a binding arbitration might be an appropriate process.
Okay, so for example, they might have decided they're going to sell the house, they're going to liquidate certain assets, keep others, but the percentage of that cash payouts they're still wrangling over. That
correct. Or there could be a factual issue as to whether a debt is owing or not, and everything spins around that.
Yeah.
So you put part of a dispute to an arbitrator, and that could be resolved reasonably quickly and reasonably cost effectively.
Yeah. Certainly compared to throwing it all back into affidavits and starting again at court. Yeah.
And it's still giving the parties some control. They're getting to choose they're choosing the process. They're choosing the arbitrator. They're choosing. They're engaging to some degree anyway in how the problem is being framed to the arbitrator. And there's lots of research that if people feel that a fair process is, if they've been involved in the design of the process, they might be more accepting of the outcome and therefore more willing to actually influence it.
Yeah, and I guess, the fact that it is a binding arbitration agreement rather than a court order that might go to appeal, it gives a bit more finality.
It certainly gives them finality. So often clients say, what's the point of doing mediation if there's no guarantee of an outcome?
Mm.
Arbitration, in a sense, is the reverse. Yes, there will be an outcome. You
Yeah.
don't have total control over it, but there will be an outcome.
Yeah.
Having said that, as I said about 5 minutes ago, I still have a preference.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a paternalistic bias of people taking responsibilities themselves.
Yeah.
It's an interesting process as a mediator, then who started doing arbitrations. I remember doing my very first arbitration. And about halfway through, I thought, this is pretty easy. I just sit here and listen to these people talking. And I'm used to sitting as a mediator and you have to really engage with people.
Yeah.
Show empathy and do some rapport building and do some brainstorming with them, all that sort of stuff. It was quite interesting to flip the dynamic around. By getting control about the outcome, you thought it might add to the stress, but it actually doesn't. It actually makes it easier because you don't need to engage with them. It's this, you just sit back passively. And I suppose to use a classic sort of adversarial style decision making. So that was something interesting I learned out of that.
Yeah, that you're basically a private judge, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
When you've got your arbitrator hat on, and
as a result, they're on their best behaviour. They're very nice too.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yes,
because some mediation clients, I suppose, they don't need to really worry about your thoughts because you've told them, I don't get to make the decision for you. Or maybe they use you more to vent and carry on with it. So the dynamic, how you have the structure of the conversation has a big impact upon I suppose, the noise.
No, look, that's a really interesting perspective to to understand just how important, I suppose, how important the structure is to the way that people show up and respond to it. Just a little reminder for us, I guess. So one of the things that I've noticed or you've indicated is that, it is valuable having that breadth of different services that you can offer, from the point of view of someone entering the industry, but, also continuing in the industry of dispute resolution. So any thoughts or advice for new entrants to the industry around that?
I remember my very first mediation training at Bond University back in 1990 something, and John Wade, who had taught me family law at university in 1980, said, "Don't give up your day job."
Yeah.
And I thought it was a fairly fair thing to say. So when people ask me about, what mediation course should I go to, I'm not going to answer that question now because I might upset some mediation training service providers. I normally say, well, think through why you're doing the mediation training.
Yeah.
Certainly for lawyers who intend to keep acting as lawyers, that is taking sides, so to speak, a mediation course is great to improve your mediation skill, your negotiation skills, your ability to engage constructively in the mediation process. So I suppose you've got to be just realistic. It's hard work working up a mediation practice. To do it in isolation will be difficult. And keep increasing your skills. The way I've sort of approached it is you've got to differentiate yourself from all those other practitioners up there. So you can learn a fair bit in a standard 5-day mediation course. If it's a family law one, really think about doing an FDRP course. So people can ask you, do you sign a Section 69 certificate? And you can say yes, although that's not what I consider my job to be, to sign certificates.
Yes.
And then keep doing further training. There's lots of interesting training out there. And it actually doesn't take a huge network to get a reasonable number of mediations coming in each week. So most of mine come from a reasonably small network of lawyers who just bring mediations to me. But it would be hard for someone coming into the field cold to set up that network. So to do it yourself, maybe you've got to go and work at an FRC for a while to get your network happening. And that's why many lawyers do it. Piggyback the mediation on the back of their legal practices.
And look, some of probably about a third of our or students come from a psychology, social work, that sort of background. So often they continue working in that sort of an area and add mediation as an option. So same sort of thing of expanding their service range rather than one day hanging up their shingle and expecting to fill the practice in that way. It's but that's useful and important for people to be aware of, that it is, a business that needs to be built up. It's not guaranteed work. Although since the 90s, I'm sure you've seen I suppose a change in the difference of approaches towards mediation.
There's certainly increasing amounts of work. It's seen to be mainstream, but that's got to be balanced by the fact there's more and more people getting qualified.
Yeah, absolutely. So supply and demand.
Correct.
So yeah, you need to build your reputation and establish a network of people that trust you and feel confident to refer work to you, as with any other referral business, as mediation is.
Yeah, indeed.
Is there something that you'd really like to? Because I know you're talking at the national conference in Canberra, and you've got the surveys out, and I'm sharing it out with our members about those. So, what's the interest in position papers that you're?
I suppose the interest in position papers, I never asked for them, but so many times, particularly in lawyer-assisted mediations, you get an email from one of the lawyers a week beforehand saying, "When do you want my position paper by, Matthew?" I normally think to myself, well, actually, the last thing I want your client to do or you to do is to take a position. That's not what mediation's about. And therefore, the last thing I want from you is a position paper. So that got me thinking through what can such documents be useful for? What aren't they useful for? What are the different choices we've got for doing them? And also, how useful are they? Again, doing mediations, many lawyers put a lot of effort into position papers and probably charge the client an hour or two, and they're never referred to during the course of mediation. So there are ways that can be used productively. My survey is trying to work out to what degree they're actually referred to during the mediation. I shouldn't really give this away, I suppose. One of the questions is to lawyers, have you been influenced by a position paper from the other side? I'm reasonably confident lawyers will say to that, of course not. In which case, well, maybe your position paper isn't influencing other people either, so why are you doing that?
Exactly.
But who knows, maybe I have everybody saying, yes, I always find the other side's position paper really useful and I find it very influential and persuasive, but who knows. So that's why I thought I'd do it. I might be wrong, maybe they're more productive. So there's different ways they could be used. If it's a device to get clients and lawyers, if it's lawyer assisted, thinking about issues, thinking about options beforehand, thinking about what the other person's concerns might be, that's entirely useful. Whether you need to share it with the other side is another question. If it's being used to keep get the media up to speed, well, I suppose if that makes them feel better. I don't think it's so important for the mediator, but if parties feel as if the mediator's on top of it because they've heard a bit of a story beforehand, fair enough. If it's going to be for the other side, you've got to think it through very, very carefully. So that's what my interest was, because they're commonly used in some places and commonly not used in other places. So that's what the paper's about. I shouldn't really make my mind up about it till I get all my evidence in. I'll send you a copy once it's done.
Be really interesting. So the position paper, you're right. It's kind of absolutely contrary. Now, if it was a Watner Batner paper, that'd be interesting.
Well, that's right. And I'm wondering whether just using that name. I mean, people use different terms. The Americans call them mediation briefs. I've heard from English people where it's called an issues paper. There's different, or an issues briefing. So one can sort of calling them a bit different will change what people actually do, but also got to think through the usual issues applicable to all mediations. Who's the audience for the paper? And also who's the most important audience member around the table. It's not the mediator. It's not yourself. It's not your own lawyer. It ends up being the other party. And secondly, I suppose, their lawyer, because it's the other party's lawyer who probably has got the most influence upon the other party.
Absolutely.
I often say to clients, don't be scared of the other lawyer. They're actually your friend or ally, because they're the person who might actually help achieve some of your goals of resolution, and they're the one who's probably got permission from the other party to have that difficult discussion with them.
Yeah, because that's probably something that people that aren't doing a lot of lawyer inclusive mightn't realise, that often the job of the lawyer is to convince their own client that it's a good deal and they should accept it. Is that kind of what you're...
Often the expectation of spouse A in respect of lawyer for spouse B is that lawyer B is a dreadful person. And I always say to lawyers, well, don't be fazed by that. If you've got low expectations, it's not hard to pass them and seem all right. So you can sort of work with both sides to try and have a more productive discussion and see that things can be more constructive than they often think when they first come in.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we're talking about before we started this conversation was that continuum of processes. I kind of see it as a continuum of processes, but you mentioned this, sort of sometimes people see them as separate processes completely between the facilitative and the more evaluative.
I suppose some people might put forward some argument that facilitative is facilitative, and if it's going to be facilitative, then there is no advice given at all. Other people might say, no, it's more sort of shades of grey on a continuum. I often, in a lawyer-assisted mediation, people often want me to express a view. I normally try and duck that if I possibly can, and instead say, well, why don't we talk about how you might present your proposals to the other person? So I suppose we did really talk about coaching, I suppose.
Yeah.
And is that still within the facilitative range? Or if you're starting to give them advice or coaching, I suppose, is how they might want to go about framing a proposal, although you've been totally silent as to the merits of it. Is that facilitative? Would that become a bit of evaluative? Let's go to the process. So I must admit, I think there's been more of a continuum rather than separate silos. Normally, I would try and do a purely facilitative process and avoid expressing a view if at all possible. You often can duck having to do that, but I do any mediation with lawyers coming along. So in a sense, that's evaluative. I'm ducking doing the evaluating, but the lawyers are there doing the
process is there too.
And I normally say to clients in pre-meetings that, okay, so you both want your lawyers to come along, that's fine. At some stage, I'll initially facilitate a discussion between you two about what your concerns and needs might actually be. But at some stage, I'll throw it to the lawyers and say, what do you two are the lawyers in the room, what sort of factors do you think the party A and party B need to take into account? Now, often they'll answer that question by going to their default courtroom mode and start talking in terms of, well, the balance sheet's this, Matthew, and their contributions are this, and there'll be an adjustment section 75(2 like this. And in pre-meetings, I'll say that's what they might do. And what you'll find is they both come up with different outcomes. That's interesting, isn't it? I wonder why that's the case. The subtext being, well, maybe one of them both don't know what they're talking about because you're a very good lawyer, so that won't be the case with you. Alternatively, they might be engaging in the usual bluffing, posturing type traditional negotiations lawyers do, and you two have to think through how useful you find that to deal with your particular situation. Or thirdly, they may not agree because it's family law and there's a broad range of discretion.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, when they give you advice, they're not really telling you what's fair and reasonable. All they're telling you is what a court might do.
Yeah.
And
based on the information that you've given them.
Yeah. But even then, as you'd be aware, Joanne, courts can only do certain things. And my experience has been that two motivated, focused spouses with some decent professional support can actually come up with better outcomes than what a judge could actually do. So I always think, okay, well, I'll give the lawyers an opportunity to talk about possible court-determined outcomes. They won't agree, so don't be too worried about that. But isn't that just the baseline? Aren't we here to try and work out how much better we can do than the baseline of a court-determined outcome? That normally relaxes spouses a bit and gets them a bit more constructive.
Yeah.
About 15 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely, because sometimes what gets lost in all of this is that we're talking about their stuff, their money and their children. you know.
And the way in which lawyers go about trying to persuade each other through this sort of default courtroom type submission, it often has absolutely no traction or resonance with the parties at all.
No.
And it's forgetting, and it's understandable, but it's the lawyers losing track of who is the audience, who is the decision maker. It's not a judge. The way you go about persuading a judge, it's going to be quite different. You go about persuading the people who actually know about the situation and are personally affected by it.
Yeah, absolutely, because long after you've gone on to your next clients, they have to live with the consequences of the decisions that are made.
I always find it interesting that either in an actual courtroom or where we're using the courtroom as some sort of reference point for possible outcomes, that the decision maker, this judicial decision maker, is the person in the room who knows the least about the part situation.
Yeah.
Because the rules of evidence are all about keeping information away from the judge.
Yeah.
And it always just seems paradoxical to me that, okay, so one option for you is to go off to court and not do this mediation, or to go home no for the mediation and have a judge who knows nothing about your situation make a decision. Or even a parenting dispute, someone who's never going to meet your children, who doesn't love them, who knows nothing about them, you'd rather them make a decision than you and the other parent, who are the two real experts on the children.
Yeah, and look, I think there's a naivety that people have, certainly when they start out in family law, which is often when they're deciding they don't want to use mediation. They think they're going to go to court and the kind and wise judge is going to, understand them and find in their favour. They have no concept of what it's really like in there.
Well, I think also, and this is understandable, for each individual family law client, for them, their divorce is the world's worst, which is fair enough, because it's their lives, their home, their money, their children, their future. But it's not the world's worst divorce. And what judges have to deal with is vastly more dreadful.
Yes.
And I think some clients think some judges are going to be shocked by what's happening for them, and they're not. So, again, you want to have a more nuanced discussion about the reality of your situation, but all the different options you've got. Court doesn't really provide that opportunity. No. Mediation is one way you could have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I noticed you mentioned was using co-mediation with mediators with different backgrounds. Is that something that you've done to try and help with some of those?
I've done that a few times, and it's interestingly enough come from the request of lawyers. And I think their logic is, our clients are a bit difficult, often lawyers use mediation so the mediators can sort out their difficult clients.
Yeah.
And therefore, there's some legal issues here. We want someone with a lawyer's background to sort of manage that, and someone with more of a counselling psychological background to handle the emotional side of things. It does sort of position the lawyers. It's got a bad to it. Sorry, it does position the mediators to some degree. And when I've done them, often quite wisely, it's been a co-gendered,
which can have some benefits.
Male, female, which is good.
Yeah.
Because that way we can model effective communications between gender, blah, blah, blah. Because I have felt as if I'm meant to be the lawyer one, and therefore I'm meant to be being evaluative. So that's made a strange little dynamic. But I found it good because you can pay greater attention to them. It's hard as you're doing the opening, you're hearing the opening statement to start constructing an agenda whilst doing a readback and all the rest of it. Yeah. So two heads together are good, but there are some pitfalls to it as well. So I suppose if I'm asked to do it, I'll do it. It's a good idea. I suppose it remains to be seen. What I've always found interesting about dispute resolution is there's different process choices available. You never really know which one is going to be best for these people until you give it a go. Then you find out either you're right or you're wrong. However, trying to choose the right process for those particular people, not thinking, mediation's best for everybody, or collaborative practice is good for everybody, but trying to work out which fits these people well, I think it's a big impact upon the quality of the agreements actually reached. And I think lawyers could spend a little bit more time with their clients thinking through what sort of process do you want to use. I think often that process selection discussion is more reflective of lawyers and their needs than necessarily the parties. And parties will do what they're told. But I normally try and have a discussion, if I'm the lawyer, with the client about what have been the prior attempts to resolve the dispute, how's that been for you? And because they're seeing you, they'll say it's been dreadful, you've got a litany of complaints. But out of that litany of complaints, but have been trying to work it out to date, you can flip it around and find some aspirations, how they do want to do things, being the reverse of what they don't like doing.
Yeah.
I think we need to be working out what's their motivation for doing it and ride their skirt tails rather than a lawyer saying this is how you should do it.
Yeah, look, I completely agree. We as mediators, we need to be not become religious about it, and it's the panacea of all ills. Obviously, it's not. It's a really good process for the right type of clients. And
I suppose it feeds back in one of your earlier points you raised in terms of court-referred mediation. And the big dynamic it makes, whether it's mandatory or voluntary, it's a fairly sort of common issue in the literature. But I normally say, even where it's court-referred and there is some degree of compulsion involved, well, all you have to do is come here. You don't have to engage. You don't have to stay. Do you want to stay? And if they'll stay, they're sending a strong message to each other. They want to sort something out.
Yeah.
And I also find it useful if you hit an impasse towards the other end of the process, not to say you've got to keep it this, the door's locked, but you want to keep going at this. And if they've hit an impasse, I'll stay a bit longer. And again, they're sending a strong message to each other.
Yeah, and look, I find that the better mediators do that. They even when people have to be there, they do everything they can to also make sure that they want to, or they acknowledge that they do want to resolve the issues, because it's a much more powerful place than thinking your partner across the table is just there because they're forced to be there.
That's right. In fact, I don't really ask for opening statements anymore from parties. What I normally ask for after my opening statement about confidentiality and neutrality and all that stuff is why have you chosen to do mediation when there's other processes you could use?
Oh, nice.
So hopefully they'll say things like, I don't want to go to court, I want to save money, I want to do it amicably, blah, 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 blah. And I do a careful read back of that.
Yeah.
Just so I can do a direct read back at that point. But so during the rest of the day, I can keep saying, well, that's interesting. Started back at 10 o'clock and I look at my notebook and say, you said to me, and I think the words you used were, you not go to court and you want to save money. So you got to keep pulling them back to that.
But remind them.
And that's not to be flippant or laugh at them. It's hard work doing what they're doing.
Oh, absolutely.
Just to remind them of what their aspirations were, because they can forget about it.
Yeah, it can get lost in the frustration of the
particularly when you think they're both saying similar things.
Sometimes you look and you think you're saying the same thing with just slightly different words, and you have to reflect back till they can see that. But no, that's wonderful. I think it gives us a really good idea of the span and sort of scope of the options that are available. And there's early neutral evaluation and all sorts of there's other processes as well. So I think what any mediators out there that aren't aware of all of the options and the people that can provide other services in their area, need to have a look around. And perhaps not see each other as competitors, but look at where are the synergies and the the next step processes for their clients.
I know, indeed, Joanne.
So look, I'm aware of time. Are there any final comments or anything you'd like people to as a takeaway reflection?
Well, I suppose that I always feel doing mediation work and dispute resolution work is endlessly interesting. It's great fun. I know that sounds a bit flippant. I'm not really trying to make fun of other people's problems, but it's a great area to work in because it's an intersection of a whole bunch of things. There's some law there, there's a lot of psychology there, there's some sociology there, there's gender studies, there's a whole bunch of stuff happening there. It's never boring.
No.
So, that's why I sort of feel privileged to do it, because it's endlessly interesting. I sometimes think is when clients are spilling their guts to you, why are they giving me the privilege to hearing all of this stuff? And what I've also found interesting is a lot of these skills, they're not, there's the mediator skills, they're not really intuitive, intrinsic ones. I'm a bloke, I'm middle-aged, I'm a lawyer, so I claim no great intrinsic empathy.
Yeah.
You just do all that active listening stuff, and it works. It's a process. And do that active listening stuff. You repeat back to them what they're saying, and you express your concern for them. It's amazing what they'll tell you, and particularly as blokes.
Yeah.
Sometimes they turn up in my office. There's a mediator, and it might be the first time they've really had that discussion. Again, that's part of the privilege of doing this stuff. They're letting you do that. And also the fact that it's endlessly interesting. So I'm glad I don't do conveyancing, Joanne.
No, it's nowhere near as interesting as mediation. I'd agree. I think that's a great place to end. So thank you so much for your time. It's been really interesting to hear a little bit more about the way you're working, and I guess it's not that different to the way most of us work in. You know, we're just really trying to help our clients come to decisions that are going to be right for them and their family.
Yeah, and it's hard work.
Yeah, it certainly can. It's hard work for them, and it can be hard work for us too.
Okay, thanks for talking, Joanne. I've enjoyed it.